Hi, I'm Bob Gruen. I live in New York City, and I've made a career of photographing rock and roll bands. The theme today is Dangerous Minds. I never really thought of myself as a controversial figure, but I have worked all my life in the field of rock and roll, which many people do consider dangerous, and for many years it was banned, and in a lot of places it still is. I've worked with a lot of powerful artists who inspired the world, and I've helped promote their image. There's often a feeling of anarchy when thousands of people are gathered, each free and expressing themselves in their own way, 4 or 5 musicians at the center. Nothing compares to the chaotic excitement that you get in the middle of a loud, live show. Rock and roll for me has always been about the freedom to express your feelings, loudly. I enjoy being from New York, and I used to wear a shirt like this all the time. I got several of them from the guys who made them and then sold them on the sidewalk in Times Square. I used to give them to my friends, and I gave one to John Lennon. I'm most well known for taking this photo, done on a rooftop of John Lennon's apartment in New York City in 1974. He had asked me to come and take some photos for his new album, Walls and Bridges. He wanted me to do it in a quick and simple way so he didn't have to interrupt his recording schedule. He wanted to do different photos of his face so he could make up different expressions by flipping cutout strips. I went to his place and I put up some white paper on a wall of his penthouse terrace, and we did a series of shots. Then we took a few more photos to use as publicity, and after I suggested that the shirt I had given him a year earlier would be perfect with the skyline around us, he went and put it on and we took the shots. We had no idea it would become as well known as it has. But I'll explain how I got to do this. The first concert I saw was Pete Seeger, who played at my local high school. I was 13 and I thought it was the most interesting, powerful, and fun experience I ever had. He sang about peace and love and freedom for all. He sang songs asking for equality for workers, and I remember the song Ticky Tacky, criticizing a lack of individuality. He encouraged the audience to sing along, and everybody had fun. He was singing about all the things I had been taught were morally right, but within a week there were letters in the local newspapers fiercely attacking him as an anti-American communist and condemning the school system for allowing him to perform. I was shocked because at the concert he hadn't been against anything except narrow-minded bigotry. It was my first experience with an artist who delivered his so-called dangerous message in such a disarmingly entertaining way. It became my favorite kind of music with a message. A few years later, I was listening to Bob Dylan, Tom Paxton, Phil Oakes, and the other rabble-rousers of the folk movement. I was at the Newport Folk Festival in 1965 when Bob Dylan famously played with an electric rock band. To me, it was a declaration that rock and roll was the folk music of America. It said that people booed, but actually it's not as simple as that, as there was many people cheering as booing, even many just yelling at each other in the seats. People seem really afraid of any kind of change, of anything being different. The musicians I like sing about social politics, not just lust and desire like most pop music. Lonely Teenager by Dion is far simpler than Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone. And though I appreciate both, Bob Dylan has made a much stronger impact on our cultural psyche. In those days, there was a theory that people should turn on, tune in, and drop out. And I did. Little did I know that by dropping out would actually be my road to success. They asked me to talk today about times I drew a line in the sand and wouldn't compromise. Well, by the late 60s, I knew I wasn't cut out for a 9-to-5 job because I just wasn't able to make the 9 o'clock part. So I had to be independent and work for myself. I was living with a rock band, and when they got a record deal, the company used my photos and started to hire me to photograph other groups. I went with a few friends who said I must see Ike and Tina Turner, and I took some pictures. At the end of the show, as the strobe light flashed, I set my camera for a 1-second exposure and took several shots. This one came out right, and I think it's one of my best. A few days later, I took the pictures with me to show my friends when we went to another Ike and Tina show. As I was showing my friends the photos, Ike Turner walked by, and one of my friends pushed me in front of him and said, "Show Ike the pictures." He liked them a lot, and he told me to come to more shows, and soon I started to travel with them. My first album cover was for Ike and Tina, and this led to many introductions and a lot of new contacts. As an independent freelance person, you answer only to yourself, but you wake up every day unemployed. You can choose what you want to do, though often the pressure of life's expenses causes you to take on jobs solely for the money. But that's a choice too. I got to work for a lot of record companies doing trade shots and publicity photos for hundreds of bands. This was my rent money. I photographed a lot of different events, groups big and small, day and night, sometimes 4 or 5 times a day. I also did a lot of groups for fun, for free, new groups that didn't have any money. And my outlet for this was Rock Scene magazine. This magazine was edited by Lisa Robinson, who was one of the top music columnists in the world. Rock Scene was something we all did for free, like a fanzine. For Rock Scene, we did photo stories about the whole rock lifestyle. And we didn't limit our stories to groups that were known, but rather to groups that we found interesting. The pages of Rock Scene were alive with photos of touring and parties. We were underground, off the grid, funky distribution, but we inspired people, many of whom have since come up to me and said that after reading Rock Scene, they left home and moved to New York because we made it look like so much fun. And that always makes me feel good. Living the rock lifestyle, I became friends with many of the musicians I met, and I could take photos of them in casual settings. A lot of the bands I worked with were not famous when I met them, and I was able to record their early moments. I got to know the Ramones when they couldn't even afford guitar cases. I worked with many big-name bands too. Led Zeppelin had their own tour plane when I met them. Lisa Robinson called me one day to say we were going to Cincinnati with Led Zeppelin. When we got to the airport, Robert Plant asked me to take a picture of the band with their plane. This photo is on the first roll of film I took of them, but it's one of the most well-known pictures of Led Zeppelin. It really sums up the excesses of the rock life of the 70s. In the early 70s, I met John Lennon and Yoko Ono in New York. They were the kind of artists I admire, encouraging people to think about peace and love. And like Pete Seeger and Bob Dylan, they were constantly attacked for their views. The President of the United States wanted John Lennon deported because he was afraid of his message. And what was his crime? He dared to speak about peace in a time of war. I believed in the ideas of John and Yoko, and one of the main reasons I wanted to help them was that I felt their message of peace and love was so important. I wanted to take a picture of John in front of the Statue of Liberty to help dramatize his case, the statue being a symbol of welcome to the country whose government was determined to throw him out. I was thrilled that John agreed with me to take the picture, but I was surprised that after we'd done it, not that many news outlets published it, being afraid to be involved in John's case. After he died in 1980, the picture became more popular. I think this is because many people relate to John Lennon as a symbol of personal freedom, similar to the Statue of Liberty. I worked with a lot of groups that were considered dangerous. The New York Dolls frightened people because they pushed the accepted boundaries. They dolled themselves up, not as transvestites, but as beautiful men looking for a kiss. When asked if they were bisexual, the leader answered, "No, we're trisexual. We'll try anything." In fact, they were the most macho gang of guys I've hung out with, and they attracted more groupies than any of the others. A lot of the bands I worked with were very wild. One time my dad bragged to his friend that I was in Japan working with the rock band Kiss. Instead of being impressed, however, his friend was shocked and said that Kiss advocated wanton sex, drugs, and rock and roll, meaning all that was wrong, and that they were a threat to society. When my dad asked me if this was true, I didn't know what to say. Personally, I thought, I like sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And I don't think this is a threat to society. I don't advocate drug use, and neither did Kiss, but I think there should be room for fun in a free world. People think I'm lucky because I worked with so many famous bands, but actually I worked with thousands of bands that didn't make it and never would. But the luck was that a few of them did become successful, like Debbie Harry here. I got around town on a bicycle, and later on this moped, because it was faster, and I always had to make deadlines. There's a fear factor involved in being a free agent. Personally, I'm afraid of everything. I'm afraid to get out of bed in the morning. I'm afraid to stand up because I might fall down. I'm afraid of every decision I have to make, but I don't let it stop me. I live in fear, but I'm not scared. Fear is the adrenaline that keeps me going. I crave peace and quiet, but I thrive in chaos. The Sex Pistols caused a real commotion when they used a common curse word on public TV, and they were widely condemned for it. They were just a rock and roll band, but people made such a big deal about it. In 1976, I went to England for the first time, where I met many of the people who became the punk scene in England. And he encouraged me to photograph the Sex Pistols, who seemed obnoxious at first, but are, in fact, pretty nice guys when you get to know them. It was at Club Louise that I first met Joe Strummer and Mick Jones of The Clash, and I went to see them at one of their first shows in London. When I came back to England a year later, I called their record company and said I wanted to see The Clash, and I was told the band was difficult to work with, that they couldn't make any arrangements for me. When I said I really liked them a lot and I would buy a ticket on the sidewalk if I had to get in, they told me they were playing in Edinburgh. So I went there to see them, and I ran into Mick Jones and Paul Simon in the lobby of the hotel. Mick seemed to recognize me from the previous year, but Paul hadn't met me. Mick asked if I was the photographer from New York, and when I said I was, Paul sneered and said, "Well, you better watch out from us. We're cunts." I answered in true New York style, "Yeah, you look it." And we've been friends ever since. I took this photo that evening and I went on 2 tours across America with them. And I also went across America with the Sex Pistols on their tour bus. While the shows were pure mayhem, it was actually pretty mellow on the bus, mostly beer and reggae music. But when the door opened, all hell broke loose. They were young, arrogant, and very free, saying whatever they felt, and many people were insulted by their attitude and their rude behavior. People were throwing things at the band, and they threw it back. It was the 70s, but people were still afraid of rock and roll. In Texas, one night on the phone, a friend back home told me he'd seen a story on the TV news about the Sex Pistols, about Sid Vicious hitting someone with a guitar. It was just a moment, no big deal, no one got hurt. I had seen it happen and thought nothing of it, and I was shocked that this was considered news on the other side of the country. But I must say they did have some idea of what they were doing. When Sid and I were having a hot dog one day, I picked up my camera to take a photo, and Sid said, "Wait a minute." Then he put some more mustard and ketchup on his hot dog, and he smeared it on his face to match his button. He was a mess, but he knew how to express it. I sought out and worked with the Clash because they had a profound commitment to work for a better world. They encouraged people to know your rights, and they began one song with the phrase, "What are you going to do now?" They say the Sex Pistols made people want to scream with rage, but the Clash gave the people the reasons. I prefer people who are seeking solutions rather than just complaining about problems. John Lennon said, "There are no problems, only solutions." Many people consider the Clash the only band that really mattered. And after they broke up in the early 80s, I didn't see that kind of band again until I met Green Day in the late 90s. I was very surprised when the Green Day album American Idiot became such a worldwide success. Their songs were about the same kind of ideas, ranging against the system's lack of opportunity, hypocrisy, and teenage angst that the punks had been royally attacked for, but here was Green Day receiving all kinds of awards for the same sentiments. There seems to be a thread of social commentary coming from folk music through rock and roll that continues today. People tell me I must have led a very exciting life, and I tell them yes, and I still do. I still go out all the time to see shows. I take pictures that I post on my website, bobgruen.com, and I still like a show that inspires people to get up and shout. This photo of Courtney Love shows she wasn't about to stop just because she'd spent the previous night in jail. I think that a dangerous mind is one that thinks for itself. It's willing to question authorities. I think that being dangerous is about being free. Society is afraid of people who are independent and make their own rules. They can't be controlled, and this is the danger. As Jack Nicholson says in Easy Rider, everyone talks a lot about individual freedom, but show them a free individual and they get scared. It's the job of an artist to imagine, to dream up new ideas. John Lennon complained that in school, when you were caught daydreaming, you get punished. But for an artist, this is your job. You must dream and imagine. I come from a conservative family, and living my rock and roll life, I took a lot of criticism from them, which I learned to disregard. I couldn't be them. I had to be me. I try to find the fun in whatever I do. I'm often amused just by the insanity of it all, and I try to enjoy as many moments as I can. Bob Dylan said that he not busy being born is busy dying. And I believe if you're not learning, changing, and adapting, in other words, living in the present, then you're wasting your life. Thank you.